welcome back to B&J's Little Farm. Today we're reading Sweet September. We're on chapter 8. I'm going to try to pull up the chat on my phone so I can follow along. Hey Firefly, good to see you. Just waiting for a couple more people to pop in. If you haven't already, please hit that like button, share me out if you have the capability. Try to get some more people in here. Oh wow, YouTube side says I have 1 watching and the StreamYard side says 5. What in the world? Hey Wild, good to see you. Jen, hello. Wild's passing out hugs to everybody. Going into my settings right now because I forgot to set up a couple of things, so I'm going to go ahead and switch those on. Alright, that should do it. Hello Mooney, good evening to you. I'm lying here like a beach. Well, it's super hot. I just told Barrett we just got in from doing animals. Well, he did animals and I picked raspberries. And I think it's hotter right now than it was in the middle of the day. I was out in the garden most of the day today. Maybe it's because I got sunburnt and I'm starting to feel that, but it feels pretty hot. It's 81. Hey Christina, good to see you. Rainy and muggy.
It'll start raining at 8 o'clock.
Remember, for 6 months. Wow, says I'm half asleep. Yeah, we need some rain. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, we're reading Sweet September, chapter 8. Yeah, it's really humid here too, Jen. She says it's terribly humid. Sure is. Alright. Charlotte woke up to the sound of the combine sputtering in the barn. She rose and padded to the window, gazing out into the pre-dawn darkness. The window was slightly ajar, and the cool wind brushed against her bare arms, causing goosebumps to rise on her skin. She rubbed her arms, sending up a silent prayer that the old combine would start. Bob didn't need the stress and struggle. With each false start, she could imagine his blood pressure rising. Tilting her head to look to the front, she noticed Pete's truck wasn't out there. Now where's that boy? There were times he went out and played pool at a friend's house or stayed up watching those guy movies that were high in action and minimum in storyline. He never got into big trouble, but he didn't always make the wisest choices either. Wild says it's been cool and I can't wait for the heat to come back. She hadn't seen Pete after he had dropped off Sam, and she had a feeling he was up to something. Charlotte dressed quickly. The clock read 6:45 a.m., and the first rays of pink sunlight peeked over the tree break east of the house. The house was quiet, and she decided to let the kids sleep a little longer. She wished at times like this Pete had a cell phone. Not that it would do any good if he was anywhere on the farm, but if he was in town, perhaps she could reach him. She was thinking about calling Pete's friend from the feed store when she noticed headlights coming down the road. She crossed her arms over her chest and walked out to the front porch. Toby wasn't there to greet her, and Charlotte assumed she was in the barn with Bob. She imagined Bob was venting steam as he worked on the combine, most likely mad at the old machine for not starting, and even madder at Pete for not being around to help. Still, what could she say to her son? Pete was too old to be scolded. He worked the farm from sun up to sundown with very little pay. Sometimes it was hard for both her and Bob to remember Pete had his own life beyond the farm. In fact, maybe it was the farm that hindered him from having his own family too. Charlotte turned to go back into the white clapboard house where she noticed more vehicles following Pete's truck. Her hand moved to her throat as she saw Pete wasn't returning alone. From the looks of it, he wouldn't be working alone either. 2 large combines, 2 work trucks, and a grain truck followed Pete's truck as he turned onto the long gravel driveway. A knot tightened in her stomach. She stepped back into the house and hurried to the dining room, where she sank into one of the high-back wooden chairs. Hi, Halloween collector. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Her hands around the edges, but deep down she knew he was just a kid wanting to help his dad. I talked to Bill. He agreed. So you're both in on this? Bob interrupted. Well, I just wanted to talk to someone and make sure I was doing the right thing. I know you didn't think you could talk to me. Bob's hand slammed against the metal door of the combine. Thought your brother, who hardly sets foot on this place, would know what to do better than your old man? Bob! Charlotte approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. He stopped pacing, but the words continued. I don't need their help. I've been harvesting by myself all my life, and now some know-it-all kid? Bob! Charlotte's voice rose. Dad, listen. I knew you wouldn't be happy, but I also knew that if you tried to do it all yourself, it would kill you. I'm only one person. I can't drive a combine and the grain truck too. He turned to Charlotte. Tell him, Mom. Tell him that he needs to take it easy. Pete turned back to Bob, his shoulders squaring with determination. Sure, the profit won't be as big, but who's going to take care of Mom and the kids if you kneel over dead? Bob turned to Charlotte, his eyes intent on hers. He pushed his hands deep into his front pockets of his overalls. So you were in on this too? No, but if Pete talked to Bill, and well, he's right about the work. And the old combine isn't what it used to be. If Pete got a deal, she bit her lip, refusing to bring up the subject of Bob's health. He hadn't wanted to hear it before, and he sure didn't want to now. Listen, Dad. Pete pointed a thumb outside. Those new machines, they work twice as fast as our old one. And the crew, they're a good bunch of guys. They take care of everything. It's a good deal. Good deal? Bob removed his hand from his pocket and hit it against his thigh. Wow, it's plumb foolishness paying someone to do the work when there's perfectly fine machinery in the barn. A fine machine that doesn't run? It was Sam's voice as Charlotte glanced up, for the first time noticing he'd followed her out. Bob pointed his chin in Sam's direction. Oh, and so now everyone else knows more about this than me? Everyone has a better idea how to run the farm? Bob readjusted his cap on his head. Well, good. Then they can just have it. If everyone else thinks they know best, then they don't need my help. With long steps, he strode off, exiting the barn, walking angrily around the corner in the direction of Heather Creek. Firefly says, oh boy, sounds like a scandal's going to happen. Charlotte glanced from Pete to Sam and then back to Pete again. She let out a helpless sigh. You know how your father gets. He doesn't mean those things. He just gets angry. Not just at you, but angry at what he can't do anymore. Nothing I didn't expect. He still sees me as a snotty-nosed kid. Doesn't understand that it's for his own good. I know. She buttoned her sweater button slowly, deliberately trying to find the right words. But I see his point too. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of money. Those men out there have mouths to feed back home. They have to pay for those machines. It's not like we have all that much saved up. We're going to need every penny with the kids here. She touched Pete's arm. Pete jerked his arm away. Yeah, like I said, nothing I didn't expect. First the rant, then the lecture. Just glad I'm too old for the old wooden spoon. Hey Vermont, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Pete lowered his head and hurried out the barn. Charlotte opened her mouth to call him back, but realized he was right. Sam stood there, not saying a word. He turned and watched as Pete approached the crew, smiling and shaking each man's hand as if the last 10 minutes just didn't happen. Can I? Sam stopped short. I told Pete I'd help. He looked at her as if uncertain if he should even ask. Go ahead, get. Pete's going to need you. Don't worry about Grandpa. I'll take care of him. Sam nodded and then jogged toward Pete. It was only after he'd reached the others, looking more like a man by just being with them, that she remembered about the library and the report. She'd planned on helping him pick out books, but now Sam would most likely be in the fields all day. No doubt Bob would again make his point about Pete's influence. Dear Lord, we need your help most desperately today. She folded her arms across her chest and hugged them close, feeling a mix of thankfulness and angst over the big machines outside. One of the barn cats meowed and approached, weaving in and out of her legs in a strange way, reminding her that they would get past this day like they had all the rest. If God cared for scarily little barn cats, didn't God care for them too? Please help Bob to understand. Help Pete to be patient and kind, not trying to do too much too fast. They're so busy making their own case, they refuse to listen. She paused. And not just them, Lord, me too. It seems we're all set in our old patterns and habits around here. I think these kids are here for a reason. She watched as Sam and Pete eyed one of the large combines, talking with the driver to mix things up, to make us rethink our old ways. Charlotte sighed, and to keep us coming to you. Charlotte found herself down on her knees in the kitchen, this time wiping up a spot of something that had dribbled down the cabinet and poured on the floor, and hardened. Where is that cat when I really need him? From the large empty yogurt container in the trash, the pink goop she was scrubbing, she imagined what the pink stuff was. A midnight snack. Someone had gotten up and made something to eat during the night. Strawberry yogurt. And the half-dozen oatmeal cookies she was sure had been in the bottom of the cookie jar when she went to bed last night. Girls' voices carried down the stairs. The Lees, as Bob had started calling Ashley and Emily, entered the kitchen. Grandma, we're heading out to feed the horses and gather the eggs. Then we're going to town, right? Emily twisted her light hair up on her head and worked a rubber band around it, making a ponytail. She pulled the ponytail tight, adjusted a ball cap on her head, and pulled the tail through the opening of the back. Charlotte forced herself not to smirk at the skin-tight jeans the girl wore, but at least the t-shirt and the sweatshirt over that made Emily look like a typical Nebraskan teen. Yeah, that's right. With a grunt and a groan, Charlotte picked herself up off the floor, and while you're at it, can you walk down the road and check the fence near the far pasture? Hannah called last night and said one of the post was leaning, needs to be fixed, and I just want to make sure the cows won't get out. Hannah Carter was Charlotte's neighbor and good friend. I can't imagine anything worse than those combines losing a good day's work because the cows got into the soybeans. Sure, and then are we going to town? That's the plan. The girls clapped as if she just announced they were headed to the county fair. Charlotte watched as Ashley threaded her arm into Emily's cocked elbow, and they headed out. Her heart warmed at the sight, because the truth was, even if she and Bob lost most of the money in the bank, even if the men on the farm were having their own private war, Emily had found a friend, a good friend, and a good influence. And that was one bright spot in the otherwise challenging day. That and the fact it was harvest. No matter who brought in the soybeans and no matter who would follow up with corn next month, the Lord had provided greatly. The weather had been all they could have asked for, and they faced the months since Denise's death with God's help. More than that, the kids seemed to be adjusting, and that was a harvest blessing all on its own. She opened the butter yellow cupboard and scanned the continents inside, knowing that what the men did outside was the very thing that kept these cupboards full. From the mail pile on the counter, she grabbed a now empty envelope from the electric bill and scribbled down the items she needed to pick up at the store. Protein powder for smoothies, bread, peanut butter, macaroni. She thought about adding flour and cocoa powder to the list for a cake, but realized she had no time to make one. She scribbled on the envelope and tried to keep her mind focused on her trip to town instead of the drama this morning. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her stomach churned as she wondered what Bob was doing, how he was doing. She glanced out the window, wondering where he had gone, wondering if it would be better if she kept up with the normal plans for her day or if she should head out and look for him. If it were her, she'd want someone to come and find her. She'd want someone to talk it over with. Yet, Bob was different. He proceeded all his thoughts, feelings, and emotions inside his head and rarely wanted to talk things out. Perhaps it was due to the fact that most of the time, farming was a solitary occupation. He spent hours alone, planting, harvesting, and feeding. Maybe he'd just gotten used to letting his mind work out the problems as his body worked at its assigned task. Charlotte had just finished adding cleaning supplies and dog food to the list when Emily and Ashley rushed in. Ashley carried Emily's egg bucket and held it out in front for Charlotte to peer into. Mrs. Stevenson, guess what? The chickens you bought a few months ago have laid their first eggs. Look! Charlotte smiled at the girl's dancing eyes and her flushed and freckled cheeks. She only wished Emily would be as excited about the chores. Even after all these months, Emily hated chickens, or rather hated the smell of the chickens. Why, you're right, Ashley. Charlotte pulled a brown egg off the top of the pile. It's a pullet egg. A what? Emily wrinkled her nose. Ashley held out her hand, and Charlotte placed the brown egg in her palm, the only place on Ashley's body without a freckle. A pullet is another name for a young hen, and because they're still little, the eggs are too. See? Ashley moved over to the kitchen window and held the egg up to the sunlight so Emily could get a better look. They're smaller, a nice brown, and smoother than regular eggs. Emily took it from her and turned the egg in her hand, inspecting it in the light, like a jeweler examining a diamond. It almost looks shiny. Charlotte marveled that Emily seemed almost interested in the egg, almost. With a shrug, Emily placed the egg in the bucket and then moved to the fridge, rearranging the eggs in the cupboard carrier so that the newer, fresher ones were in the back. Not that Charlotte had to worry much anymore about food going bad. There were enough hungry stomachs around to make sure that didn't happen. Emily finished adjusting all the eggs and then picked the small brown one up to look at it again. How long will they stay like this? Oh, a month or so, give or take. Do they taste the same? Emily asked. Just like any other egg. You want me to whip up a few in the omelet? Emily shrugged, and Charlotte took that as a yes. It wasn't a steak dinner, but it was a start. It's a good thing these youngsters have begun laying, she commented nonchalantly as she cracked the eggs, whipping them, and added a little fresh milk for fluffiness. The eggs from the old hens are getting fewer and far between, and sometimes it seems like Sam goes through a dozen eggs by himself. He likes them fried at breakfast, Emily informed Ashley, and Christopher likes scrambled. As if responding to his name, the boy's voice carried down the stairs. Grandma, look! Did you see outside? His blue pajamas were decorated with a large Spider-Man face, and Christopher's wide-eyed look was fixed on the machines outside. Where did they come from? What are they doing? Are they going to be here all day? Can I ride one? The sentences come so fast, Charlotte waved her hand in front of her mouth, motioning for Christopher to breathe. Christopher sucked in a deep breath. He blew it out slowly and then smiled. Can I? Tell you what, let me finish with my list and then I'll take you out and show you around. That should give you time to get dressed and cleaned up. Christopher didn't respond. Instead, he turned and hurried back upstairs, his footsteps pounding on each step. Fluffiness? Yep. Chapter 9. His grandma wasn't in the kitchen when he finished dressing, so Christopher headed outside to wait. In the field across the gravel driveway, two large machines moved in straight lines, driving over the soybean plants and gobbling them up like a big hungry green beetle. Christopher watched the machines, and something inside his stomach jumped and danced. It was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. Large black and yellow tires rolled around and around, and though they were far away in the field, he was sure the tires stood taller than him. On the side of the machine was a ladder with big steps leading up to a window box that reminded him of the glass elevator at the fancy mall his mom used to like to go to. One man sat in the high seat with glass all around him steering the big machine. I want to do that someday, Christopher muttered. Though no one was in hearing distance, he repeated himself, I want to drive that big combine thing when I get older. The black cutter on the front of the machine was wide enough to sweep over lots of those little soybean rows, one at a time. The cutter looked like a cake eater on its side, spinning and spinning. The cutter was held by two large arms. In the field, the combine finished one row and did a U-turn to the next. When the combine turned, the cutter arms lifted like the arms of a robot. The rumble of the combine even sounded like a spaceship lifting off. No wonder the aliens liked this place. If he were an alien, he would have picked Nebraska too. Most of the cut grass stuff fell flat, tumbling under the blade and getting run over by the machine. But from his view, Christopher saw that some of the stalks refused to fall and instead jumped and danced all over the blade, hitting the glass window and falling down again into the cutter. Christopher glanced at the white house behind him and decided it would be okay to venture across the driveway to get a closer look. He would still be in yelling distance, and just as long as he didn't go into the field, he would be fine. A cloud of fine dust poured out from behind the machine, a light brown cloud. A long arm struck out on the side of the green machine, as if no signal that it was making a left-hand turn, just like his mom taught him to do when he was riding his bicycle on the street. Hello, Jeffrey. Good to see you. He could hear footsteps crunching on the gravel behind him. He glanced back and saw his grandpa standing there, watching the large machine. His grandpa's eyes looked sad, and Christopher wondered if Grandpa wished he was out there driving one of them. Grandpa, what's that arm thing? Is it like a vacuum that will bend down and suck up the soybeans? Actually, the soybeans get sucked inside underneath. Aren't they cut off? Christopher watched the machine, eyeing the blades. Yep, the blades cuts off the grain and part of the plant. Then, those pieces enter the combine. Inside, they rub between two pieces of metal called the separator. Do they separate the bad from the good? His grandpa chuckled. He rubbed his chin and nodded. Do you mean separate the grain from the plant material? Why, yes, they do. Then the grain goes into the bin in the back. Not quite. Instead, there are two screens and a big fan underneath. The fan lifts most of the plant parts off the grain and blows them out back off the combine. That's the chaffle. Then the grain runs over a second screen called a sheet, and all the grain falls through the holes, and then it's dumped into the bag. Christopher squinted as he looked at the machine and tried to picture all the pieces in his mind. Actually, it's not dumped. After the other stuff is taken away, the grain is augered into the big bin right behind the cab where the driver sits. Auger? What? Christopher scratched his head. Augered. It's like his grandpa glanced behind him, past the house, and then toward the tractor shed. I know, come with me. His grandpa led the way to the tractor shed and made his way into the workbench. Inside the house, Grandma had lots of stuff everywhere. That was pretty to look at. Grandpa's space had a lot of stuff, but everything was lined up and labeled, and he guessed that if anyone took anything, Grandpa would know exactly what was missing and where it was missing from. On the work table were old coffee cans, each one with a white sticker labeled for screws, bolts, hinges. Suddenly, Christopher wondered if Grandpa knew about everything that was in the tractor shed. He worried that Grandpa had found that old metal part that he had hidden behind the bucket. Christopher decided to come out later and check. One thing was for sure, he didn't want to lose his treasure. Grandpa picked up the coffee can, labeled screws, and took one out, holding it up for Christopher. See the way this little lip wraps around the screw from the bottom to the top? He eyed it and nodded. Well, imagine the screw top wasn't there, and the rest of the screw was positioned inside a tube. He turned the screw in his finger around and around. The auger is like that, and when it turns, it carries the grain from the bottom to the top on this lip. Sort of like a dizzy elevator. Exactly, like a dizzy elevator. His grandpa placed the screw in his hand. Christopher moved his finger from the bottom to the top of the screw, winding it around and around and around, and up to the top. Yeah, so once all the grain has been separated from the plant parts, it moves up the auger into a big bin that sits behind the cab of the combine. When the bin gets full, it gets dumped into the grain truck, and the truck dumps it into the grain bins to dry or into the grain elevator to be stored. Cool. I never knew about combines before. Christopher tossed the screw back into the can, and his grandpa put the lid back on it and placed it back on the workbench. For many years I drove one, but my old combine isn't what it used to be. Do you think I can drive one of those when I get older? I'm sure you can, his grandpa answered. And 2 combines will make the harvest go faster. 2, and the fact that they are a newer machine. Well, when I get older, we can get 2 new combines. I'll drive one and you can drive one. Grandpa's eyes got that sad look again. Okay, sport, we'll do that. Now it's time for you to get inside and get some breakfast. But feed the cats first. Okay, Grandpa. He moved to the door, imagining the furry cats all running toward him when they heard him pour the cat food into their big dish, except for Lightning. Lightning had his own dish in the house. Christopher put his hand on the doorknob to open the door. "Christopher, wait!" He turned and saw his grandpa holding a toy tractor in his hand. "I remembered I had this in here. It used to be Pete's when he was about your age." "Really?" Christopher's eyes were wide. "Can I play with it?" "Sure. Don't see why not." Hey Ruben, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. You guys please remember as you come in, hit that thumbs up. Share me out if you have the capability. Cool. It looks just about the right size to give the cats a ride. And with that, he took it from his grandpa's hands and rushed to the barn, deciding that he could wait until later to check on his treasure, because he was sure the cats never rode a tractor before. You're welcome, Ruben. Chapter 10. Christopher. Charlotte called up the stairs, wiping her hands on her apron, partly for therapy and partly out of the necessity. She was in the middle of peeling apples for applesauce. She did have a lot of apples in the cellar that she needed to do something with, and she didn't want to head into town until she had talked with Bob. Surely he would come back to the house. He couldn't spend the whole day wandering the farm deep in thought. "Christopher," she called louder. "Are you up there?" There was no answer. "Emily?" Charlotte turned to the girls making ham and cheese sandwiches for the workers. Emily had come up with the idea of an assembly line with pieces of bread lined up from one end of the long table to the other. Emily paused from spreading mustard on the pieces. "Yes, Grandma?" "Have you seen Christopher? I thought he was upstairs getting dressed, but he's not answering me. He ran outside when you were done in the cellar, and you didn't tell me?" Emily shrugged. "I didn't know you wanted to know." Nice, Ruben. A cold fear gripped Charlotte's heart. She pushed the screen door open and ran toward the grain bin. "Christopher!" Her voice split the air. Charlotte felt a sharp pain in her chest and her knees trembled as she hurried toward the gravity wagon. "Christopher! Please, Lord. Please, please, Lord, keep him safe." Charlotte had told herself last night to make sure in the morning to give Christopher, Emily, and even Sam the safety talk. She didn't know why she hadn't thought about it sooner. From the time Bill, Denise, and Pete were toddlers, she had reminded them over and over what not to touch or climb on or hide under. By the time they were Christopher's age, they'd known the rules by heart. A farm was a wonderful place to live, work, and grow up, but it wasn't without its dangers. Every year, many kids were killed in farm accidents. She'd read all about the accidents in the newspaper. In the night, she'd reminded herself to talk to them, but her good intentions quickly got pushed out by the conflict between Pete and Bob. Why didn't I make sure to give him the talk, to tell him about the dangers? Christopher! Hey, Prepper 101, good to see you. She reached the red gravity wagon that looked similar to a grain car on a train. It was tall with large wheels and a door on the side. It was through that door that the grain emptied into the bins. A ladder led to the open top. It was the ladder that troubled Charlotte. More than one neighbor child had drowned in the grain after falling in. She moved to the ladder, gripping the middle rung. "Grandma?" "Christopher!" Charlotte turned and saw Christopher. Lightning wiggled in his hands. "You weren't going to climb up there, were you, Grandma? Because Uncle Pete says it's not safe." She noticed a toy tractor on the ground. He dropped to his knees and held the cat on top. He likes to drive. Christopher moved the tractor a foot forward, just enough out of reach for the cat to escape. Laughter burst from Charlotte, both from relief and humor at Christopher's wide-eyed gaze at his disappearing playmate. "So Uncle Pete gave you the talk, huh?" "Yep, a few days ago. He said things can be dangerous around harvest. No climbing on machines, no climbing under them, no climbing in them. He said to always listen to that little voice." "Little voice?" Charlotte squatted down before him. "The one that says, 'I wonder if this is a good idea.' Uncle Pete says, if you have to ask, then it's not a good idea." "That's very good advice." Christopher rose and asked his grandma, "Were you looking for me?" Charlotte felt better knowing that Christopher was safe, but she still had an unsettled feeling. Wonder what had happened to Bob. She saw Christopher studying her face, and she forced a smile. "Well, I'm taking Emily and Ashley to town. Do you want to come? Can we get a treat?" "I'm sure we can." Nice. This is a green screen, you guys, that I have up. Are we going to the library? How did you know about that? I heard you telling Sam, and I want to get some books on machines and stuff. Charlotte looked at the toy. "Like tractors?" Christopher nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, like that. And other machines." "Sure, but I need to find Grandpa first, then we'll go." Charlotte scanned the farm, letting her gaze sweep across the fields where the combines worked, across the pasture with the cows. But she didn't spot Bob anywhere. She glanced to the barn, wondering if he'd made his way back in there to tinker with the old combine again. "You need to find him? Do you think Grandpa wants to go too? Do you know where he is?" "He's in the tractor shed. Before that, he was watching the combines in the field. He told me how they work. He said I might be able to drive one when I get older. He looked kind of sad, though, so maybe he wants a treat, too. Your grandpa has been farming for many years. I'm sure he doesn't quite know what to do with himself now that..." Charlotte let her words fade. Christopher didn't need to know the details. Let him think about toy tractors and cats and treats while he can. He'll be forced to grow up all too soon. "Hey," she slapped her leg, "I think you had a good idea. Can you ask Grandpa if he wants to come? Tell him that I need help loading the groceries." "Sure." Christopher raced to the tractor shed. "Meet you in the house," Charlotte called after him. She whispered a silent prayer that Bob would cooperate. Then she hurried back to the house. The girls had finished making the sandwiches and were wrapping them to be taken to the crew. Charlotte placed her apples in the refrigerator to finish later and watched out the window for Bob. With Christopher chatting away by his side, he strolled toward the house, as he did every day. From his expression, it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Was he still angry? Bob wiped off his boots and entered the house. Charlotte turned with a smile. "We're going to town?" Bob changed from his work jacket to his town jacket. "I thought you could help me with the groceries, unless you were going to help unload the beans." "Nah, Pete's going to teach Sam to empty the grain wagon. They're not taking it to the elevator." "Guess not. Pete thinks the beans are still too moist. He's going to let them dry in the bin before he takes them in. Thinks they'll still get a better price." "Sounds like you taught him well. Everybody ready?" Bob said, ignoring her comment. "Yeah, the sandwiches and snacks are ready. We can take them out to the field on the way out." "Girls, let's go." Bob took his keys from the hook by the door. "Christopher is already waiting in the car. Do you want us to take the sandwiches?" Emily slipped on her shoes. Ashley did the same. "No, I'll take care of it." Bob's voice was gruff. says she's driving, so listening. Without a word, the girls hurried outside. Bob grabbed up the plastic bags with the food. Charlotte touched his arm. He paused and turned to her. You okay? Why wouldn't I be okay? Oh, maybe because this is the first time in 40 years you hadn't been out there with the soybeans. Bob grunted. Then he strode out the door and walked outside. He didn't need words to show his displeasure. Charlotte looked around the kitchen at the mess of crumbs and wrappers the girls had left everywhere. Normally, she would clean it up before she left, but she knew that when Bob was ready to go somewhere, he was ready to go. She slipped on her jacket, grabbed a purse, and then walked outside. Bob was leaving the food on the hood of Pete's truck. She placed her hands on her hips and shook her head, but at least he wasn't yelling. At least he wasn't moping. She just hoped that when they got home, things wouldn't blow up again. Just a little peace, dear Lord. Can we have a little peace? A little acceptance, please? Alright. Next week, next Saturday, we will be on chapter 11. I hope you guys enjoyed that story. You were able to sit back and relax, enjoy it. It was really good. Again, I have never read this book before, so I'm reading it for the first time as well with you. And it sounds pretty good. I like it so far. I want to thank you all for the thumbs up and sharing me out. I really appreciate it. It really does help my channel out. And I'm going to sign off for tonight. Remember, you're not alone. You are loved. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. And I will see you Monday. We'll see you Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, bye. Oh, thank you so much, Living by Faith. Appreciate that. Have a good night. Night moon phase.